Today we're going to be learning about the three major civilizations or empires in the Americas, the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca, starting with the Maya. After the prehistoric era, the history of ancient America is commonly divided into four periods. The Archaic stage, from 9000 to 2500 BCE, marked the shift from hunting and gathering to agriculture. The pre-classic period, 2500 BCE to 300 CE, designates the period in which the Amerindians developed an economy based on agriculture and sedentary life, represented by cultures like the Olmecs in Mesoamerica and the Chavin in South America. The Classic period, from 300 to 900 CE, refers to the flowering of material, intellectual, and artistic culture, and this is denoted by the Maya. And the post-classic period, 900 to 1500, is marked by empire building and increased warfare. And the two main civilizations then are the Aztec and the Inca. The Teotihuacan was one of Mesoamerica's most important classic period civilizations, whose height of power was from 450 to 600 CE. And at that time, it was the largest city in the Americas, with between 125,000 to 200,000 inhabitants, making it larger than all but a small number of contemporary European and Asian cities. The people of Teotihuacan did not concentrate power in the hands of a single ruler, which was unusual for the time, and even more unusual, the deeds of the rulers were not featured in public art, so we know relatively little about them. One of the most important agricultural methods of Teotihuacan was the Chinampas, or floating gardens. Chinampas are narrow artificial islands anchored by trees and created by heaping lake muck and waste material on beds of reeds. Chinampas permitted year-round agriculture because of subsurface irrigation and resistance to frost, and thus played a crucial role in sustaining the region's growing population. The Aztecs would later use the Chinampas to a greater degree than Teotihuacan, so we'll discuss them more later. It is unclear what forces brought about the collapse of Teotihuacan, but the collapse began around 650 CE. Now on to the main civilization we'll be discussing, the Maya. The ancient Maya lived in a region comprising portions of southeastern Mexico, almost all of Guatemala, the western part of Honduras, all of Belize, and the western half of El Salvador. But the Maya civilization attained its highest development in the jungle lowland area, whose core is the Petén region of Guatemala, the base of the Yucatan Peninsula. The term Maya most properly refers to a family of languages separated from each other by about the same order difference that separates the Romance languages. The lack of other languages in the Petén region leads anthropologists to believe that the prehistoric inhabitants of the area were also Mayan speakers. The dates for the Maya Classic period, which are 300 to 900 CE roughly, are fixed by the carved inscriptions the Maya left bearing dates in their highly accurate long count system of calendric notation. More on that later. Classic Maya civilization developed under relatively peaceful conditions and without the use of metal or the wheel. Influenced largely by the Olmec who preceded them, the Maya created perhaps the most advanced civilization in the Americas, with extraordinary achievements in architecture, sculpture, painting, mathematics, and astronomy. Again, more on this later. The Maya erected beautiful cities such as Tikal, which is pictured here, and Copan in western Honduras, Palenque in what is now Chiapas, and Chichen Itza at the center of the Yucatan. The Petén region was rich in wild game, the jaguar, the tapir, deer, and various other animals. And building materials, limestone and hardwoods most notably. However, clearing the dense rainforests for planting and controlling the vegetation was an extremely difficult task. It certainly raises an interesting question. Why build in the rainforest? Whatever the reasons, the Maya built some of their largest cities in the middle of this rainforest. These cities were ceremonial centers rather than living space. The people lived in simple structures outside the main complex. Anthropologists have long been intrigued by how such a large population could have been supported by slash-and-burn agriculture in the rainforest. The soil was thin and deficient in nutrients. Maya farmers adapted this environment by felling a section of forest, burning dry trees and brush, planting and harvesting corn, squash, and beans in the cleared areas for 2 or 3 years, and leaving it fallow for about a decade. It has also been shown that Maya farmers practiced an intensive and permanent agriculture based on highly productive irrigated gardens with root crops such as sweet potatoes or yams planted in raised fields. The Maya agricultural system tended to support ceremonial centers surrounded by groups of subsistence farmers. Maya peasant homes, pole and thatch structures in which the Maya still live today, were as a rule widely scattered or grouped into small hamlets around these ceremonial centers. To support such centers, Maya peasants had to be induced to cooperate in the effort to reach the level of food production the Maya state needed. This, in turn, created a highly structured society. Based on early colonial evidence about the late post-classic period, Maya society was highly stratified and divided into several classes: the lord, nobles, priests, artisans, and merchants, peasants, and then at the bottom slaves. Movement across class lines was probably difficult. The Maya lived in many independent cities, each with its own government. The highest authority in a Maya ceremonial center was the Halikunik, a Maya word that means true man. With the help of his advisors, the chiefs and priests, he handled the city's internal and external affairs. The Halikunik ruled for life and was considered a god king. He was succeeded by a son or other close relative. Rulers were invariably men, but women also seemed to have exercised considerable influence in affairs of state. Below the lord were the nobles, who served as chiefs and lesser officials and oversaw the administration of Maya cities. Some nobles lived in hamlets surrounding the main ceremonial centers. They ruled over hamlets that consisted of hundreds of compounds, each housing an extended Maya family. Nobles gathered taxes, supplies, and labor for projects such as the construction of temples and ball courts. They were also the war captains who led peasant armies to battle during war. The nobles who lived in the hamlets, however, were not as important as the nobles who lived in each of the major ceremonial centers. Below the nobles were the priests, and we will discuss more about the Maya religion on the next slide. Below the priests were the merchants and the artisans. The Maya were accomplished traders and artisans. They traveled by sea, river, and a well-constructed road system. Merchants imported obsidian and jade, the quetzal's feathers, it's an iridescent green bird, copal and cocoa beans. They sold salt, cotton and cotton goods, honey-dried fish, seashells, and the skins of animals. Below the merchants and artisans were the peasants. The men spent most of their day in the fields, while the women stayed closer to home, weaving or sewing and preparing food. In exchange for their toil, the people were expected to attend royal marriages and ceremonies marking key religious events. During the dry season, peasants often served as warriors. They fought to capture rival soldiers for sacrifice and enslavement. The very bottom rung was comprised of slaves. Some slaves were born into servitude. Others, however, were recruited from 3 main sources. A family experiencing hard times could sell off surplus children into slavery. War prisoners of humble status were directed into slavery. Those of higher rank were sacrificed to the gods. Finally, slavery could also be a legal punishment for serious crimes. Slaves were not badly treated in general, but when an important person died, his slaves were often killed and buried with him. What little we know about the Maya religion comes both from contemporary Maya practices and from a few codices, or native manuscripts, that were written during the post-classic period. Maya priests conceived of a universe in which the heavens were divided into 13 compartments. Each compartment was ruled by a god. Similarly, the underworld had 9 divisions and 9 accompanying gods. The principal Maya gods were forces and objects that affected the material welfare of the people, and many gods had animal attributes. The jaguar, for instance, was immensely important to the classic Maya. Worshipping gods in the form of animals was consistent with the Maya belief that humans were an integral part of nature. The ancient Maya believed that since their world was a recreation of a past world, it could be destroyed at any time. Maintaining the favor of the gods thus became not simply a pious duty, but the key to existence itself. Sacrifices and offerings were a key way the Maya appeased their gods. Priests led ritual practices that included fasting, penance by bloodletting after being pricked with a cactus spine or the spine of a stingray. You can see that happening right here. The burning of incense and limited human sacrifice. Along with their religious functions, priests also were the great mathematicians, astronomers, and healers, as well as chroniclers of the time. As you may remember, the Olmec invented the ritual ball game, which was also played by the Maya. You can see this happening in this painting right here. The goal was to throw the ball through one of two vertical hoops high on the wall of the court. As this could take quite a while and endanger the players in the process, players wore heavy equipment to protect themselves. The Maya priests were obsessed with time, to which they assigned a magical content. Maya priests thought of time as burdens carried on the backs of gods. Their calendars were complex and used several interlocking cycles of time. At the end of a certain period, one god laid down his burden for another god to pick up and continue on the journey of time. Each day was identified by 3 separate dating systems. The Maya had a calendar that tracked the ritual cycle, 260 days divided into 13 months, as well as a solar calendar, 365 days divided into 18 months. The concurrence of these two calendars every 52 years was believed to be especially ominous. The Maya, alone among the Mesoamerican peoples, also maintained a continuous long count calendar, which began at a fixed date in the past that scholars have identified as 3114 BCE, a date that the Maya probably associated with creation. Now, you may have heard of the long count calendar, as it was in the news a lot in 2012, as some misinformed people interpreted the end of the long count calendar on December 21st, 2012, to mean that the world was ending. But really, it's a calendar. What do you do when a calendar ends? You go to the next month. That's all that was happening. The long count calendar would start again. The Maya's calendar would have been impossible without their astronomical observations. They knew the exact phases of the moon and the cycle of the planet Venus. Venus rising in the morning was thought to set the stage for success in war, so Venus received a lot of attention from the Mayan astronomers. They could also predict the eclipses of the sun and the moon, and the priests used this knowledge to impress their followers, who viewed eclipses as dangerous events. The image you see here comes from a codex, and it shows Mayan astronomers observing eclipses and other features of the sky. The Maya invented the hemisphere's most complex writing system. It consists of block-like glyphs, as you can see here, that are an individual graphic element that gathered into compounds, which are read in double columns, from left to right and top to bottom, like this. Most of the Maya inscriptions appear to be genealogical statements about the rulers of the sites, together with accomplishments and events pertaining to the ruler. Colonial observers noted that there were many books that treated other matters, but none of these books survived the colonial period. The classic Maya had a particularly sophisticated system of numeration, in some respects more efficient than that of contemporary Europeans and other Native Americans. The system is a base 20 system, and they used place value numeration based on a sign for 0, which they may have borrowed from the Olmec. Remember also that 0 is invented on the Indian subcontinent. These two civilizations invent the idea of 0 separately. The numbers are made up of 3 symbols. 0 is a shell, as you can see right there. 1 is a dot, and 5 is a bar. In this system, the position of a number determined its value, making it possible for a limited quantity of symbols to express numbers of any size. You have here on the screen the symbols for the numbers 0 to 19, as well as basic addition and subtraction. So the Maya invented a lot of great things. They were a pretty decent-sized empire for the Americas, but they collapsed. Between 800 and 900 CE, many of the major urban centers of the Maya were abandoned or destroyed, although a small number of class period centers will survive for centuries. The question is, why? And to be honest, we don't know. Some people argue that the earlier destruction of Teotihuacan after 650 CE disrupted trade, thus undermining the legacy of Maya rulers who would use these goods in rituals. That is definitely possible. Trade is important to civilizations. Other scholars suggest that the growing population pressure would lead to environmental degradation, and that led to declining agricultural productivity, and that this environmental crisis in turn might have led to social conflict and increased levels of warfare as desperate elites sought to acquire additional agricultural land through conquest. Again, that's possible. Famine and drought have led to the collapse of societies, and we even see that today. They lead to increased warfare. Although little evidence has been found, some scholars have proposed that epidemic disease and pestilence were the prime cause of the catastrophe. Maybe they were conquered. Maybe it was a rebellion or revolution. We don't know. Most probably a combination of factors caused the end of the classic period. Now, the Maya civilization collapsed, but the Maya people are still around. They make up part of the native population of many Central American countries to this day. And you can see these countries on the map right here. This is the area of Mayan civilization and Maya heritage. As you can also see, it shows you where the Olmecs are and ultimately where the Aztec Empire will be. And the Aztecs, or the Mexica, are who we're going to be talking about next.